Hmm. Okay.
Srivastav sir, we are live and recording.
Thank you so much, General Arora. So, General Upadhyaya, uh, Mr. Pawan Agarwal, Kang Kuber, distinguished chairs, esteemed panelists joining us today, representatives from the research and development fraternity, academia, uh, distinguished fellows of St. George, members of St. George, and ladies and gentlemen. Hearty welcome to everyone joining us this morning. So, on behalf of St. George and on behalf of General Ravi Arora, CEO IMR, I welcome each one of you to this webinar and virtual expo on military transportation and logistics. Indeed, like it's been very well said, that logistics is the lifeblood of military power. It impacts everything right from procurement to discard, and its importance has been very well encapsulated uh, in the aphorism that amateurs discuss tactics and professionals they think logistics. And yet you very often you will find that those unfamiliar with the intellectual and technological depth and complexity of matters logistics, they quite disdainfully think of it as a back office and exclude it from all conversations about the ongoing modernization, transformation, and so forth. However, today's discussions will surely dispel all such misplaced beliefs. And indeed, joint warfighting tomorrow will call for very agile, responsive, survivable, and effective logistic support with reduced signatures and reduced footprints, providing logistics to an increasingly dispersed force in a very contested and degraded environment. So those are going to be the challenges of tomorrow. And logistic solutions of tomorrow, therefore, will have to be very innovative as well as pragmatic. So St. George has therefore chosen today's theme to brainstorm very critical issues related to transportation infrastructure to include rail, road, air, ports, inland waterways, where indeed great milestones have been achieved in the recent past, but much more needs to be done. And we'll also discuss transformative developments in the material management and especially the automation facets of logistics in the backdrop of disruptive technologies of the ongoing fourth industrial revolution, particularly artificial intelligence, machine language, unmanned platforms, robotics. They particularly touch the core of logistics. And indeed, they have the potential of transforming logistics tomorrow. So this is also an area where unprecedented scope for civil military fusion exists in capacities and capabilities alike. So we have therefore very thoughtfully programmed this event to first audit the status of infrastructure development in the light of nuanced military requirements in highways, border roads, ports and land waterways, airports. That will be followed by a session on air and rail transportation, as well as fuels of the future, which is also very important. And we will weave in perspectives from domain experts from all stakeholders, including the users, MORTH, Logistics Skilling Council, and industry experts. The next session is focused on strategies for automated materials management in the three services, essentially to draw from the best practices in each. And the concluding session will focus on the criticality of fusion of national logistics infrastructure with military logistics, the challenges lying therein. We will also talk about standardization, which is key to all the jointness that is involved. And we will also be talking about the challenges and pathways for joint logistics, having taken recently the baby step of setting up joint logistics nodes. And we are indeed fortunate to be having very eminent, experienced experts this morning in the inaugural session, and we'll be indeed benefiting from the the experience and the insight and the guiding thoughts that they will share with us. So, without much ado, we begin with the inaugural session, And before I request General S.K. Upadhyay to be delivering the inaugural address, a very brief introduction for the General. General is, of course, to the logistics fraternity very well known. General Upadhyay has had a very distinguished career, got commissioned in 1981, eventually has been decorated with Param Vishisht Seva Medal, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, Sena Medal, and Vishisht Seva Medal. He retired recently in January, and at that point of time, he was Master General Sustenance. He has also had extensive combat experience to include participation in common in Sri Lanka, counterinsurgency operations in Punjab, J&K, the Northeast. He also had two deputations abroad, one at Rwanda and one at Cote d'Ivoire. And of course, he has been a pioneer of sorts. He was instrumental in raising the OTA, Officers Training Academy at Gaya as the BGS, and thereafter raised 59 Div, part of the Mountain Strike Corps, as its first GOC. And his other prestigious appointments include ADG Procurement, Commandant IMA, and GOC 14 Corps. So over to you, General Upadhyay. The floor is yours.
Thank you, General Srivastava. Morning. And firstly, thank you for inviting me over. And good to be with all the fellow panelists here on the inaugural session. And a large crowd which is attending this webinar. Unlike the past, we really can't see the back end, but the whole spectrum has already been mentioned by General Srivastava. So good morning to everybody. And now the topic of the day is military transport and joint logistics. Right. So the way ahead, of course, has been enumerated. A vast subject and something one has had the opportunity to be involved in. So what I will do is I will try and catch certain key issues and maybe cite certain examples to highlight certain key areas as well as differences and problem areas which may be looked at. To start with integration, I would go the other way around. Jointness and integration is the flavor of the day, whether in operational issues, logistics issues, and currently the intra-services integration is more in focus. But things like logistics requires integration with the civil infrastructure because that is what is extensively used to actually get things done. The in-house captive capabilities that we have or we intend to have or we wish to have can be only that much because it is very costly. And if it is standalone use of the military, it is that much more cost you pay. So it makes sense to go and latch on to existing civil infrastructure, civil logistics available, which in any case has improved by leaps and bounds over the last few years, and now in improving at a even faster pace as we go along. At the national level, it is very visible, and but the catch is how do we use it, and what is our requirement. So let me start with what is the difference between military and civil logistics. So military logistics, first is the approach. Military logistics works on just in case. It caters to black swan events. Right? Something may not happen for 30 years and it will happen once. The best example is May, June 2020, when we were caught in a situation on the northern borders and the Chinese created a situation for us. So you may have to have capabilities which will be there, which will be required, and when that event happens, you are able to respond to it. But the civil logistics I suppose, works more on just in time because it primarily aims to cut cost and cut cost in the sense by maximum exploitation, getting the due returns of the investment made so that you are actually gaining rather than losing money or investing excess money. So that is the first difference that I see, and we cannot get away from it. Military logistics working on a just-in-time principle will be prone to getting into situations which are unredeemable. The second issue is what are the resources used in the for creating logistics for the military. Of course, primarily it is public resource, public monies actually. But in private or the civil, I would say not private, but the civil suite, civil logistics, we can afford to use or we definitely bank upon certain private resources being available, which get invested and invested from the point of view of getting returns. However, major investments like infrastructure and all will continue to be the public monies which will be involved. So that is another thing. Next is decision making. For creating and running military logistics systems, the decision making is totally procedural, bound by government regulations and stuff like that, and by military processes and procedures also. Whereas on the civil logistics side, those which are done with the private investment have more flexibility in decision making and ability to implement, sustain, and run the system. And another thing may be considered is post-event analysis. You know, it is easier for people to say when you get into, since public monies and resources are being used, the analysis and of investment made and returns received, the guns versus butters and things like that, where audit and other people get involved, with benefit of hindsight, saying, oh, last 20, 30 years, a particular item has not been used, right? But then I go back to the first point where you're working for just in case or a black swan event. Whereas on the civil side, the analysis is more based on returns which are tangible, which can be shown, which can be proved, and which actually, you know, are amenable to showing a productive output. So with this overall structure of military logistics, the challenge will remain: how do we exploit? How do we depend on? How do we integrate with what is available in the civil logistics side, right up to the national level? How much do we depend on it? How much do we retain with ourselves as a captive capacity? And if we are able to get this balance right, we'll be able to actually achieve the aim of uh, jointness, integration, and all that. Within the services, yes, the three services aim to integrate. And there's no reason for not doing it. There's no reason to not avoid duplication. There is no reason for us to not have 100% visibility and knowledge of what is where. There is no reason for us to hold unnecessary stocks and resources uh, while duplicating it all over the place. However, there will be a limit to all this also. Given the vast expanse that the three services have to address and the large theaters, we cannot have centralized systems like putting a resource centrally and wherever required it will be deployed there. Because the resources to move such a thing will not exist. Let me cite an example here. About 5 to 6 years ago, discussion used to take place. Why do we need to hold so much of ammunition? Hold it at a place, and since everybody will not be using it and firing it at the same time in war also, so wherever required, it will be moved. But then the question is, do you have the resources and the wherewithal to move it in such a situation? Do we visualize the volumes and the tonnages involved? And do we understand that for creating the resources or infrastructure to move such large volumes in short time frames is virtually impossible? So the answer comes is that we definitely need to hold everything everywhere, but in what quantities can be discussed and optimized as the situation improves. So as I said, it is the balancing act which will be important. Codification and standardization, unquestionable, but unfortunately we have been at it for last 40, 50 years and hardly reached anywhere. And commonality of procedures, these are some points listed out in the brief, so I'm taking the point from there only. These are all issues which can be done, but unfortunately we do get stuck in existing domains within the services. So a lot can be done, but with the right balance. Another buzzword these days is outsourcing. Another thing is, total visibility, use of IT. I would like to cite my experience. You know, luckily I spent 2 years in Ivory Coast of Cote d'Ivoire, where we had joint integrated logistics, and I happened to be the number two in that setup. This logistic setup had under it, firstly, let me explain the range. It had under it the aviation assets, the road assets, it had all the communication assets, it had all the engineering assets, and all the assets on lease from various, right? And then there was all the supply assets, that is the ration, fuel, and stuff like that. That is also. I would say outsourcing was to the maximum. The aircraft were leased, the fuel supply was outsourced, the vehicles were outsourced, minimum ownership of the UN was there. The communication was outsourced to the locals. We were only hiring from them. And you name it. So outsourcing was the order of the day. IT was used in a very effective manner. We had warehouses, the modern warehouses with 100% asset visibility. At the end of it, if I ask you, was the cost of doing business less than what we do here? The answer will be no. People will say UN in any case is a system which, unnecessarily wastes money and stuff like that. Oh, well, part of it, yes, okay, can be granted. But answer and the problem there lied was elsewhere. The problem was there was absolutely, the country didn't have much of local infrastructure. Your back-end pipeline was all dependent on things coming from outside. So those were the problems. But despite that, and despite all this outsourcing and having IT, modern warehouse, modern visibility, total visibility, asset visibility, the system still costed money. You have to sink in money. So the issue will remain that anything like this will have a cost involved to it. And we should be not looking at too much of optimization for cutting costs. We should be looking at optimization and delayering for more efficiency. If that is the approach, possibly we'll be okay. Lastly, I would like to say this civil logistics. and the national logistics integration with the military logistics. This is absolutely essential. So this is where our actual savings and cost cuttings will come. But how do we assure ourselves that these will stand us in good stead when the situation arises? The worst situation is a hot war situation where actual shooting takes place. So if we depend on, say, road transport to go into battle, up to what stage will we find people who are ready to accompany the forces into places where actual shooting is taking place? So once we quantify and we accept this risk, and thereafter you can cut down certain elements, depend on the civil resources available, civil infrastructure available, and then the bigger challenge will be how do we ensure that the civil administration or the uh, civil government and the government setup at that time, or even the private setup at that time, will respond to the need in real time as we require. So there is a whole lot of work, there is a whole lot of issues involved. As you keep going deeper into it, it keeps getting complicated. But it can definitely be done, and it needs to be done. There is no two ways about it. That's what I would like to put the larger perspective in place and listen to others maybe. And I would definitely be very keen to listen to Mr. Pawan Agarwal to give us the civilian perspective of this. Thank you, General Srivastav, and over back to you.
Thank you so much, General Upadhyay, and particularly the issues where you have drawn in from your practical experience and a vast experience at that. You have you have shared as to how a modern logistics system that leans heavily on outsourcing and leasing, etc. Efficiencies are there, but the caveats are, yes, the cost itself is, there's no cost saving as such. You have to invest money, so that is not a decision criteria that once you take that path, there will be savings. Uh, good for everyone to understand this issue, and the issue of synergy and integration between civil, military, national, and military logistics, as well as within the three services. The issues that you have recounted, all of them, I'm sure all of our listeners would have taken note of, and we'll make sure that we pay due attention to that. Uh, the issue of flexibility with private infrastructure investment and involvement, that brings in, that's where the expediency comes in. But at the same time, if you rely, like you rightly said in your closing remarks, that uh, assurance and reliability of anything which has to be delivered during times of crises, that kind of confidence has to come slowly. So thank you so much for your thoughts. And Ravi sir, has General Yadav joined us?
I see him on the screen now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Um, Good morning to you, General Yadav.
Oh,
Hearty welcome. Sorry, I didn't see you on the screen earlier. I missed out on the initial remarks. Hearty welcome to the webinar. And before I request you to share your thoughts, a very brief introduction for the General would be absolutely in order. Uh, General Yadav, Senator, is the Director General of Supply and Transport. He is an alumni of the National Defense College, has had a very vast experience through his long years of service, including that of a Brigadier ASC of a Strike Corps, MG at Headquarters Eastern Command, a very vast expanse with huge responsibilities, and also Additional Director General at the ST Directorate for Fuel and Transport. Uh, and incidentally, he is the only non-military farm officer to have headed the military farms. And of course, he has been the commandant of the ASC Center and School, uh, ASC Center and College, before stepping up as the present appointment of DGST. Yadav has been sharing his thoughts on this platform very often. So we are indeed grateful to you, sir, for having found time, and the floor is now entirely yours. Thank you.
Thanks very much, sir. Jan Srivastav, sir, Director Sessiojn, and Jan Arora, uh, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Sir, I'm indeed grateful for you to have organized this webinar on a very contemporary and important issue um, concerning military logistics and giving me the opportunity to address this August gathering. Logistics is a discipline of planning and carrying out movement, supplies and maintenance of military forces, sir. It involves long hours of planning, precise execution, and is a key factor which impacts the operational outcomes both in peace and war. We all understand that there have been rapid changes in technology, improvement in infrastructure, the capability of private enterprises improved tremendously, and it is making a huge impact in the manner in which logistics is being planned and executed in our country and worldwide, sir. So I understand the issues which have been chosen for deliberation are very apt, and they need our focused attention. There are few thoughts that I have, sir, which I would want to bring forth. Firstly, we need to differentiate between peacetime logistic management and the wartime logistic requirement. The current structures, the assets, processes are all meant for sustaining the war machine in peacetime, but for it to be able to successfully execute war when required is also extremely important. However, we keep looking at the logistics setup under peacetime prism and keep looking at optimizing through numbers, which may be detrimental for supporting wartime effort. While it is extremely important to have only the optimum level of logistic sustenance, but in working out what is the optimum requirement, we need to exercise tremendous amount of caution. We need to imbibe technology to bring efficiencies in our processes, improve planning and positioning our resources. But we need to have structures which are resilient and provide redundancy in logistics during operations. Because there's absolutely no scope for any failure. The requirement to synergize civil assets and resources with military logistics is, absolutely given. There's absolutely no confusion, there's no doubt, there can't be any compromise. Currently, the civil assets are already being utilized for peacetime logistics activity like warehousing of grain by FCI, transportation of fuel by oil companies, utilization of civil air transport, procurement through the DPP, GEM. On mobilization, the logistic grid and communication zone will retain the structures and support synergy. However, given the complexities and dynamic nature of operations and logistic support under enemy fire, to increase dependency on civil structures in combat would not be very sound planning. Therefore, it is extremely important that we have our own structures which can be supported by the civil structures. But total dependency on civil structures uh, is not what I would recommend. In addition, we have to have a full and intimate command and control over all assets of responsive logistic support, especially so when the Union War Book is invoked. That means when the Union War Book is invoked, the civil infrastructure which we feel can be of use to us has to come under command and control of the defense forces. I also want to state, I heard Jan Upadhyay speaking about how they handle logistics in the United Nations. There's a very subtle, and I totally agree with what he said. But there's a subtle difference in way the United Nations would do their operations, because they're all out of area operations. Within our own country, we have to be more focused. And if we have our own resources, which can be used by civil also, or the resources which civil have that we can use, then that is the way forward. Uh, Templating what the United Nations does, or templating what other big armies like United States of America or other modern armies do when they are in out of area operations, say in Afghanistan or Iran, we may go wrong. We have to find our own solution. Next is transportation, sir. In most military operations, early deployment of man and material moves on military assets. Although these early movements may account for only a small part of the total, they are often the most critical ones. Increasing numerous low-scale operations without officially declaring general mobilization results in a greater pace for military deployment than ever before and increased dependency in integral capability of armed forces. However, as the integral resources are not adequate, numbers are not there, and therefore we need to prioritize. And thus, a large quantum of military cargo, personnel, war-fighting assets, they now move on the commercial assets. But there's a vital difference between tactical transportation, which is primarily based on 4x4, 6x6, and 8x8 platforms, and the transportation in the communication zone. Very often, we want to shift to the commercial transportation, not realizing that within our country, there's not even one producer of transport, whether it is Tata, it is Ashok Leyland, it is Mahindra, which produces 4x4 transport and sells it in the civil market. All the 4x4 transport which is produced in our country is meant only for the defense services. Therefore, there's no chance of any 4x4, 6x6 or 8x8 transport being available in the civil market. And so, as we say, it can be hired as CSG. However, whenever we look at the planning figures, we very often happen to imagine that this kind of transport would be available to us through the civil sources. The transportation in tactical battle area, TVA as we call, it simply cannot be met by the commercial assets. But yes, in the communication zone, civil transport should be fully utilized. There's tremendous amount of improvement as far as transportation is concerned in the industry, in our country, in the world. But another caution that we need to exercise, the armies cannot move to Euro 4, Euro 5, Euro 6. While in our country, we have moved to Bharat Stage 6 as far as the fuel is concerned, which is very lean fuel with minimal pollution. The world has also moved to Euro 6, which is akin to our Bharat Stage 6. The technology in vehicles has improved, has gone to Bharat Stage 6 and Euro 6. Yet, whether it is the US Army, the British Army, the NATO forces, everybody is at Euro 3. In our exuberance to get modern technology, to get modern vehicles, we should not lose sight of this fact. And what Indian Army follows is also very similar. Our main vehicles, which are meant for operations, have not gone beyond Bharat Stage 3, while some of our light vehicles may be at Bharat Stage 4. The simple reason is the moment you go to Bharat Stage 4, the diagnostics becomes a huge problem. You need a laptop, a vehicle needs to be connected, and the diagnostics is done through that, which neither our army nor the other armies can afford. So this is the kind of caution that we need to exercise. Yet there are technologies which we can imbibe. We are thinking of electric vehicles. There are armies which are working on it. The US Army, the British Army, they all are busy trying to kind of experiment, come out with capabilities which can be utilized using the modern technology for the warfare. At our end, even in India, ASC Center and College, the Faculty of Transport Management has started work on this, and we are also looking at these niche technologies as far as transportation is concerned. I would now express my views on joint logistics. Joint logistics is an emerging imperative in the Indian operational context. There is tremendous scope for integration of logistics among the three services. However, there's a little misconception regarding integration of forces and integration of logistics. What I understand, what theaterization achieves is the integration of operation control of forces in a theater under a single commander for superior application of force, which flows through application of all types of forces and assets under command, be it Army, Air Force, or Navy. Now, this is best achieved through integration of staff at the apex levels, common communication channels, joint planning. However, this does not entail integration or co-location of forces and assets. It also does not necessarily entail creation of new joint logistic structures at the execution level. For example, in combat, logistic support of land forces means daily replenishment across IB or LOC in enemy territory. For Air Force, it is refueling, rearming, and maintaining serviceability of aircrafts to maintain quick turnaround at the air bases which are within our own territory and which are at well-established bases. For Navy, it would mean replenishment at sea or replenishment at the port. Thus, we realize that the requirement of the three services is totally different. And each service has to utilize and exploit its resources for the operations. Now, another logistic support between various, the difference is, while in land forces, it's interplay of human resources and weapons, be it battalion support weapons, tanks, artillery, or with terrain playing a major role in resources required. However, for Air Force and Navy, they are all platform-centric. And their op logistic plan hinge on application and sustaining their platforms, unlike the armies. Now, this difference we need to understand and plan whatever combined logistics that we think of. While integrating this logistic supply chains and methodology of support, what we need is to create joint logistic structures at the staff level only, not at the level of execution. We need to bring about convergence of processes, communication, automation. I would also like to highlight that for dry supplies and main grades FOL supply chains of Army and Air Force are already integrated. Even Navy used to be integrated till it got disintegrated maybe about 20 years back. So that level of integration is already existing. Three fundamental enablers to automation are standard database, connectivity, and common software solutions. Without automation, no amount of creation of logistic structures is going to help in execution of logistics as desired. A common database highlights the importance of standardization across the services. While the process of standardization is underway, the progress, as General Upadhyay also brought out, is very slow. But I would also like to say that the progress that we have made in last maybe 3 years or 4 years is what we had not made in last maybe 20 years. So there's tremendous amount of improvement that has taken place as far as standardization is concerned between the three services. Though it's still the work in progress, but tremendous amount of work has been done. We need to exploit the emerging technologies like IT-enabled seamless supply chains with enterprise sensor integration, AI, blockchain, cloud computing to solve the legacy issues and establish an automated logistic grid. We in ASC are already looking at the supply at the blockchain as something which we need to imbibe. The work has already started, in fact, as far as blockchain and ASC is concerned. We need to start planning for migration to cloud in the right earnest and also overcome our fears of cyber security and build solutions with inbuilt encryption if we are to really fully realize the potential of these technologies. Uh, there is some kind of a fear I feel among the armed forces when it comes to cyber security and how it is used in the industry and how it is applicable to the army. Uh, Gentlemen, we have a full and challenging agenda over the next few hours, and I do not propose to keep you from it any longer. We have distinguished panelists lined up to express their views on various facets of logistics, and we all look forward to an enriching discussion on that. Thanks very much, sir. Thanks very much, everyone. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, General Yadav, for your very candid views. In fact, the inherent complexities and contradictions that you have highlighted in each of the issues that you have mentioned, basically giving us a bit of caution in the pathways that we choose. Now, you mentioned that peace and field, peace and crisis, conflict operations, there's a difference. The volumes, they change phenomenally. But here I would say is that by virtue of a vast portion, 50% and more of at least the land forces perpetually being on the borders, and also crises coming in like Doklam and Eastern Ladakh and so forth, they give us a very good hands-on experience, like Kargil did, and as to how we can use these as case studies to evolve our systems to make sure that there is absolutely the required optimal delivery during conflict. You have made a very clear distinction between what modern countries are calling private military companies, PMCs, and using them for logistics in operations. Yes, the manner in which they are employed and involved, and the manner in which we have to fight our wars in contiguous conflicted border zones, is different, and force protection being a challenge. What elements are used in the tactical battle area would require a fine decision, as you have rightly flagged. You also mentioned that transportation fleets are very different for the armed forces, 4x4 and 8x8 and so forth, which is not in demand in the civil street, which in fact could be in the future be a cause of a little worry, because unless our infrastructure, surface highways, right to the border areas, their configuration doesn't change to be able to use civil transport, then increasingly civil transport, larger volumes and growth are driven by the civil requirements. So therefore, the forces will land up having a very small component, which increasingly will find very, I would say, dedicated kind of production and support. So being smaller number in future, that could pose problems, because that will not be, it will not be incentivized by the civil to stay invested in that direction. So I'm sure, like I've been in a border area, and I can say that the Siang Valley, right now, right up to about 15, 20 kilometers sort of the border, a good class 70 kind of accessibility is there. So I'm sure by and by, as infrastructure develops, this kind of differentiation, inability of civil transport CSTs possibly would get overcome. I'm sure our viewers will take note of your caution and understand the subtle difference. About jointness, you have once again made a very fine distinction. You have said that it should be left at the staff procedural communications level, and the last mile delivery at the front, at the cutting edge, tactical, that is service specific. and each service has a nuanced requirement. Obviously, one is platform, Navy and Air Force are platform centric, so there is a difference. Land forces are different in the last mile delivery. I'm sure those nuanced differences will be taken care of as we evolve our joint structures. We already have these three joint logistics nodes, Guwahati, Port Blair, and Mumbai, and it's too early to maybe talk about what kind of experience that we are gaining in there, because they are not digitally joined as of now, and it's only a physical requirement of meeting the requirements of local forces there. So as we gain experience there, I'm sure we'll be able to evolve pathways that meet our and each individual service requirements in the best manner possible. So thank you so much. I think you have made very, very incisive comments, and all our viewers will take them into consideration. Thank you so much. I now move on, and I would request Mr. Pawan Agrawal, Special Secretary Logistics, to share his views, and a very brief introduction for our viewers. Mr. Agrawal is a Special Secretary, as I said, in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and he is from the 1985 batch of IAS, and he has had a very vast and varied experience. Has been a Secretary in the Department of Consumer Affairs, and a CEO of Food and Safety Standards Authority of India. He has also served in the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. He also had experience in the Planning Commission, Ministry of HRD, and University Grants Commission. So with that short introduction, Mr. Pawan, the floor is entirely yours.
Very good morning, General Srivastav. Am I audible? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, General Srivastav, General Arora, for giving me this opportunity to join this very interesting and important webinar on military transport and joint logistics. I have learned a great deal from General Yadav, General Upadhyay, and General Srivastav on military logistic issues, and they cannot be denying the fact that logistics is lifeblood of military. In fact, even in the civil side, the importance of logistics was only understood perhaps only recently in the context of pandemic. The first wave, when I was Secretary Consumer Affairs responsible for essential supplies across the country, the kind of coordination that was required with the, particularly private sector companies that were responsible for essential supplies, and who over a period of time were going into just-in-time supply chains to reduce cost, thin inventory. Many of them did not have warehousing facilities at all because they were sure that they can transport their supplies to any place in the country at a very, very short notice. And with that kind of a scenario, when recurrent lockdowns in the context of pandemic occurred, I think they had to change their strategy. I like this approach of, just in time. From just in time, they then move to just in case. In case there is a bandh, there is a lockdown, how can they maintain supplies for the next 1 week, 2 weeks, a month? So that became, I think, a changing paradigm in logistics, even in the civil side, so to say. In my current role as Special Secretary Logistics, we have been established some 4 years ago for precisely the same purpose that you are talking about, joint logistics. That in India or elsewhere in the world, the concept of logistics in civil is rather new. They have been talking about transport ministries or mega transport ministries. And as you all know, that we in India also have 4 transport ministries at the national level. And at the state level, the structures may vary, and they will obviously not be counterparts to civil aviation. But the civil aviation now the ports, shipping and waterways, road transport and highways, and the railways. These four ministries, essentially responsible for infrastructure, but also related to it some issues. In some cases, railways are also responsible for operations, but in roads, operations are largely with the private sector, and so is the case with the shipping and aviation as well. But overall scenario was that they were working in, these ministries have been working in silos, and there was a thought that why not look at all these transport ministries, the services they provide in terms of transport and warehousing and related services jointly across these ministries, and so that there is more focus on leveraging the efficiencies, the advantages that each of these transport sector provides, and move on to something what we are now referring to as multimodal transportation. So it is in this context 4 years ago, this division was created, and we embarked on this task of creating a national logistics policy. And there are very few countries that actually have anything like that. Korea, Germany do have, but not many other countries do not have it. So they were not good reference points. And even those countries that have logistic policies, these are rather new. So, and their context is very, very different from the Indian context. So it has taken us a little longer than what would have taken to put together a framework for integrated development of the logistics sector. And what I'll share with you, because this plan, this policy has been finalized, I'll give you a preview of the logistics policy. And before that, I will just share with you my own understanding of the military transport and joint logistics issues that we are discussing today, primarily from the previous three speakers, but also, we have been reached, senior officers from the Department of Military Affairs have been reaching out to us to ensure that the policy that we are formulating takes into account the strategic concerns of the nation, focus on military logistics as well. And in that context, I am happy to share that this is included, with the inputs that we have received from the forces. My own understanding is that in peacetime logistics, where 85% of your movement and use is done using the civil facilities, what will basically guide that logistics is essentially cost saving, efficiency, and sustainability, I would say. But with the, I think I heard General Yadav mentioning that sustainability and moving into a modern, more sustainable transport may always not be very good. And I do not understand these things very well. I'm sure taking that into account, but the main focus has to be primarily on efficiency and cost reduction in peacetime operations, but also keep prepared for a wartime situation. In wartime situation, obviously, all the civil logistic assets should be available for military uses, whether through war book or otherwise. And I think as a nation, we should all work together to combat that unforeseen situation that we are in. And there is absolutely no doubt about it. But what is important, both for peacetime and wartime situation, is to have coordination arrangements. And these are the coordination arrangements that the policy talks about, both at the national level, state level, and in some places even at sub-state levels. So I think participation of the armed forces with whatever local formation or state formation or national formations are there at different levels is so important during the peacetime, so that the military can respond fast and utilize whatever assets, civil assets are available in those situations. So that is, I think, is being brought out in the institutional arrangements that we are putting in place through the national logistics policy. And I wanted to share with you that. Now I'll give you an overview of the logistics policy as such. And this is with the primary purpose that this is definitely a policy created to take care of civil logistic issues, the movement of goods and service goods that happen all the time. And that amounts to currently about 13 to 14% of the GDP. And with that significant amount of expenses involved on logistics, obviously there is first a scope to reduce these costs and give competitiveness to Indian manufactured goods or commodities, both within the country and to the consumers and for international competition. But also see that our logistics sector moves into a sustainable, environmentally sustainable mode. So these are the focus areas. Now, the primary focus is on synergetic use of logistic assets, which is pretty similar to what you have in the joint logistics you are talking about. And when we are talking of synergetic use of logistic assets, a large part of inefficiency in logistics is because of empty backhauls, return trips, or half full truckloads moving. That adds to the cost. But if all this can be, managed by not looking at a sectoral logistics, but looking at logistics for all the goods that move, so efficiencies can be achieved. So the focus is, preparing perhaps sector-wise plans, but integrate them at some level, so that, and obviously visibility is very important to ensure that logistic assets are optimally used. So this is the first element of the logistics policy. Next element of the logistics policy is that when it comes to international logistics, international trade, it becomes a little more complicated, because of processes, etc. involved. And therefore, how do we create competitiveness for the country as far as international trade is concerned through logistics, efficiency? And here, working with the customs, working with DGFT, and of course the transport ministries is so important to be able to create that efficiency in international trade. But these logistic requirements, both for national movement or international trade, they are on the four elements or four pillars of that. One is, unified policy and regulatory environment. Currently our logistics or transportation or carriage of goods is governed by 6 different legislations, and therefore there is a lot of confusion between modes of transports, between liabilities across different modes of transport, the terminology used, the forms used. So to provide a unified policy and regulatory environment is the first pillar on which the national logistics policy stands. And this obviously will also help the military logistics, that you do not have to, when you are talking to rail, you don't have to bother too much. It will be similar to what you are doing with road, etc. So I think that unified policy and regulatory environment gives huge advantage to the civil logistics, but will also give benefits to the military logistics. Interconnected infrastructure. We all understand that the first mile and last mile will usually be by road transport, will not be by rail or by shipping or even aviation or by air. So how do we create infrastructure looking at first mile and last mile issues, but also there may be advantages of moving part of the goods by rail, and then using the coastal waterways, coastal shipping to move from place A to place B. And we have a large coastline. And coastal shipping, coastal movement of goods in India, particularly for domestic movement, has not reached to the desired levels. Inland waterways is another option which is not being used optimally. So interconnected transport infrastructure is another focus area in which we are basically working towards a national master plan for multimodal connectivity. And this national master plan, which is currently being steered by DPIIT, is now complete and is likely to be announced soon. The third element of that is, you know, complete digital transformation, and these are areas that the generals also spoke about, and in the context of, again, the civil logistics is as important, and this is more important for us when we are looking at integrated logistics, because even though transport ministries have their own digital systems, but the stage at which they are, varies from ministry to ministry. And the whole idea is that how do we integrate them into and to provide a seamless experience to the consumers, to the customer. And finally, holistic skilling ecosystem. Obviously, the large skill logistics sector requires many people to take care of different things, and there are gaps in the skilling ecosystem. How do we fulfill these gaps looking at the entire integrated logistics sector? And all this governed by resilience, which is very important and more important in military logistics than perhaps in civil logistics. And this resilience part is becoming more important in the context of pandemic, sustainability, and innovation. So I'll stop here. I've shared with you the big elements of the national logistics policy that we have to put in place. And these ideas have been converted into 75 action areas where specific actions are required to be taken, both by the logistics division itself with the help of others, but many of these areas fall within the domains of the corresponding transport ministries. They are supposed to be doing it within the overall framework provided in the national logistics policy to provide a more efficient, robust, integrated logistics sector for the country, so that we can fulfill our aspiration for 5 trillion economy that we aspire to become in the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pawan, for giving us and all the viewers a very good insight into the endeavors of creating integration and synergy at the ministerial level, as to how the four ministries are now working together in unison, and thereafter outlining various facets of the national logistic policy, and as to how we are one of the few nations in the world which has now taken that approach. So all this is very heartening to know that there will be more synergy, as indeed there is no other choice. As General Upadhyay also mentioned in his opening remarks, that there is no choice, because cost optimization, the army, the forces, they have to leverage the national transport and other infrastructure, logistics infrastructure, in any and every way. So the issues that you have mentioned, you have outlined, I'm sure, like you mentioned, that there is a constant interaction between you and representatives from headquarter IDS, from DMA. So that's once again proof of that there is cognizance of the nuanced requirements of the armed forces being taken care of. So thank you so much, Mr. Pawan. I think all our viewers stand hugely informed by your observations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, General.
Now I move on to Colonel Kuber. Colonel Kuber is presently Director Aerospace and Defense in Ernst & Young, and like me and General Upadhyay, was commissioned in 1981, is an alumnus of the National Defense Academy, where he subsequently had a tenure as an instructor. He is a super specialist in electronic warfare, having commanded these systems in operations both in the Northeast as well as in the J&K. He has indeed played a very pivotal role as director capital acquisitions, and he was the architect of the offset policy. He set up the defense offset felicitation agency, felicitation agency, right? DOFA in 2005, and he has been an advisor for good reasons to the Ministry of MSME, as also an advisor to the DRDO. He's also been invited by a number of foreign firms, Umbre, Raytheon, Rafael Israel, as also the government of Australia, to share his views related to defense procurement. And we also formed part of the committee of experts who formulated the DPP way back in 2016. And he thereafter went on and founded Sughosh Advisory in 2017 and Sughosh Media in 2018, which is an e-magazine with a focus on MSMEs. So with that brief introduction for you, Kankuber, may now request you for your views. Thank you.
So thank you, sir. Thank you very much, General Srivastava, sir, General Upadhyay, sir, General Arora, sir, Mr. Pavan Agarwal. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here, and I was very happy when I heard Mr. Pavan Agarwal talking about wartime versus peacetime synergy, interconnected infra, holistic skilling, and integration being the key. And he talked about the 5 trillion economy. So most of the things that I wanted to talk is generally has been spoken. So I want to begin with an illustration. Some 5,000 years ago, in the greatest war of all times, the Kurukshetra War, which was known for its efficacy in information warfare, in electronic warfare, in anti-missile capabilities, skill development, and most importantly, logistics, which played a very, very dominant role in the war. And how Lord Krishna, in connivance with Nakula and Saideva, devised the logistic system in the war. So this is one of the greatest battles was when Dronacharya was heading for Arjuna, and how Drishtadyumna was stopping Dronacharya from not reaching Arjuna and creating a logistic problem for Dronacharya. And this is we are talking about 3,93,660 chariots with riders. We are talking about 4 lakhs elephants. We are talking about 11 lakhs 80,000 horses with horses. We are talking about 19 lakhs 68,000 infantry, and that was the magnitude of the war. And how the mechanized columns, if I may call, were moved, and how they were stopped. So one of the very interesting things is also about the king of Udupi, who took care of the logistics requirements in terms of food for about 39 lakh soldiers who had gathered for the battle. And I believe it's recorded history which says that not a single grain of rice was wasted during this war, and neither the soldiers went hungry. So people were amazed, and when he was asked as to how can you actually cook exact amount of food, knowing that there will be some people who may not be there in the next day, because people keep dying in each day of the war, and how he actually accounted and how he kept a account of all this. So therefore, logistics is all about efficient management, less wastage, or rather no wastage. I mean, there's a classic example of where there was no wastage at all, and how he managed all this. So we have all this, and therefore I can say that logistics was actually efficiently managed even 5,000 years ago. So therefore, I don't find a reason why we could not do it today. I want to give another small example that, it's always easy to come first in an exam, but it's very difficult to sustain the first position. and their logistics plays again a very important role. You can go and capture an objective with sheer might, with sheer valor, but to sustain the objective, you need logistics, and therefore logistics planning becomes a nightmare, and we have to actually cater for that. I can give you an example of an amphibious operation that we launched in the Northeast, crossing the Brahmaputra on boats, and how we planned that operation in Lower Assam, and I was at that time as a major leading the electronic warfare operation to create the electronic blackout of the island. And it was all about timing. When you create that, when will the logistics move? When will the infantry move? When will the vehicles embark, and how? So more than the operational planning itself, it was the logistics planning which took the center stage, and I think that spoke a lot about that particular thing. So we all know that it's a discipline of carrying out movement and maintenance, and we know that today we can use the DG ST also talked about AI. He talked about cloud computing. He talked about so many things, that how the forces are using technology. And we also should remember that equipment management, inventory maintenance, identification of spares, replacement strategies. Again, if I were to give you the example of the Kurukshetra war, you think that there is somebody who can assemble a weapon on the battlefield. So he thinks about it, he says some mantra, and then that arrow is available. That particular missile is available. How does that happen? This is all about how they manage the logistics and how they were masters in material technology, and therefore one could easily assemble weapons on the battlefield. So today we know that DRDO is entrusted with requirement to augment the soldiers' capability during logistics activities performed by the military in terms of ammunition for the diverse terrain, the long distances, the military gear, and things like that. And various concepts and configurations are being decided as we talk. In the operational context, we should talk about the Sino-India War of 1962, which was lack of engineering equipment, lack of tentage, rations, communications. So it was a very poorly logistically planned operation. Very few roads. I mean, this is very well known. 1965 war, again, we were known that non-intensive sector was supplied ammunition and intensive sectors faced a shortage. So I don't want to go into that, but I want to talk about the Second World War, when a failure of joint and combined operations strategy on the China theater, where it was declared with substantial US effort on the China theater, failed to accomplish even the minimal objectives. So it's all about, convoluted command structures, inadequate logistics, intense personality conflict, and a determined resourceful foe. So logistics did play a very important role. We have created a knowledge paper, and I just want to run you through the paper as we say. I think General Arora would release it after some time. We have given a complete chapter on land mobility and logistics for the, we talked about the Joint Administration Planning Committee, which is then we talked about the JPC, and we talked about how MGO, COM, Chief of Material, the AOM, COL, DGOL, and all this, how it's come about and what roles they play. We talked about the supply chain of the military logistics in India, in which we talked about certain of the computerized logistics systems like the CICP, the Army Computerized Inventory Control Program, the Navy's Integrated Logistics Management System, the Air Force Integrated Material Management Online System. We talked about standardization and codification, which are key to efficient and effective logistics management. From the outset, you see, Soviet Union, to a very, very great extent, universalized and standardized the process, and that's very important. In logistics, standardization is very important. So even in the late 60s, one could find the same prime mover which was being used in different warships and ashore for power generation, as well as for heavy duty specialized commercial military vehicles and common tractors plowing the fields. And this was again talked about by Mr. Agarwal, and I think I will come back to it at some time before I conclude. But I want to say that this is something that we need to keep in mind. There are some challenges that are being faced, like the gaps in the logistic systems, which when plugged can exponentially improve the efficiency and competitiveness, lack of codification and standardization to the levels that we want, different services with different reporting authorities, with delays in decision making. After all, logistics is a horizontal discipline, and it can be applied in a very integrated manner as we are in the process of restructuring our armed forces and in theater commands. And when we talk about all this, we have to identify these horizontal disciplines and actually create a commonality between the three services for no wastage and effective management. The DG mentioned about blockchain and migration to cloud, and here I want to give a classic example of a wonderful company down south in Bangalore, which is called Etat. Etat in Sanskrit is that is Etat. So it's a company which provides education on cloud to about more than 25 universities today, and we are talking about labs which are being set up in the cyberspace. We are talking about cybersecurity systems which this company can do, and there are these companies which are providing services to universities, to few state governments. They are in the process of doing that. I think this is something we need to probably engage. In the paper, we also talked about the global military logistics system. For example, we talked about the Defense Logistics Agency of the United States Armed Forces. We talked about the Defense Logistics Organization of UK. We talked about the responsibilities, the functions of the Chief of Defense Logistics, which is in terms of unified logistics operation, harmonizing of logistics systems and spreading the best practices, developing a common approach. Actually, this all is required because today we are talking about jointness. In fact, jointness within the service is just one aspect, and here we are also talking about jointness amongst various ministries. And therefore, I think we need to develop on the benefits of smart procurement initiatives. We have to talk about the common approach to industry in support area and adapt the best systems, best globally available systems which are already there. We talked about in the paper, we also talked about the importance of technology in the current environment and how it impacts logistics with the conflict changing in times, the asymmetrical warfare, humanitarian crisis, and we talked about how blockchain, AI sensors, sensor fuse, and other technologies that could go along with it. We have come out with a few recommendations in terms of a common procurement agency for cost effectiveness and improving quality control. We talked about commonality in warehousing. We talked about the case of integrated logistics needs for the paramilitary forces. We talked about automation and networks. And today there are more accurate means of computer-based simulations and intelligence available. And therefore, I think in terms of logistics plans, forecast, distribution systems, we need to adapt the best AI fused intelligent system, because that will give us so we have more than about 26 lakh items. We talked about that. We also talked in the paper about the NATO codification system, which is the 13-digit code, and so how we could standardize this, and 56 countries have already opted. I think we need to move pretty fast. We have given a flavor in the paper on the third-party logistics and the importance of participation of the private industry. So I want to emphasize here and come back to the point and say, we had the armed forces were at a system which evolved because in the 50s, when the country became independent, around that time we didn't have an effective industry. Because the British actually butchered our industry and relegated it to a state of zero. And we have come up from there. Actually, they took away all the best practices in industry and moved it to England. And today we were left with nothing at that time. We are bouncing back. And today, the industry is different from what it was in the 50s and 60s, and therefore there is a great amount of synergy that can be brought about. And let us remember this mantra: what the industry can do, the armed forces should not do. And therefore, it's very important for us to reap the capabilities available in the private sector with its experience, reach, and efficient operational capabilities as an excellent medium for the armed forces to collaborate and render services in military logistics. So there are some principles of 3PL, the third-party logistics. I think we can use that. We have given a complete chapter on military transport, and we talked about what the DG did talk about, BS4 and other standards. But I think what we have to think is something beyond. If we keep relegating ourselves and think the conventional way, we will get back to the standard companies which are there. And we talked about the companies even not able to provide a 4x4 in the civil market. So we need to talk about key bait land platforms for which make up the military transport to include the troop carriers, refuelers, vehicle for gun mounting, firefighting, UAV support, etc. Um, Other than Ashok Leyland, Tata Motors, Mahindras, OFB, Bemel, Vehicle Factory, Jabalpur, we hardly have anything. We did talk about the strategic lift in terms of the C-130s and C-117s. We have got today about 11 C-130s from the US in service. And after one of them crashed a couple of years ago, the two squadrons are housed in the Arjun Singh Air Base in West Bengal and Hindon, with the whale papers in Hindon. So they have been extremely useful in various occasions in terms of not just cargo and also special operations like aerial refueling, search, rescue, paradrop, and electronic surveillance. We also have an existing fleet of 10 C-17s, which is now close production in Long Beach, California. We have the last customer for them, and after we took that, we have about 11 aircrafts today. In Operagram, I want to give an example because I was reading this somewhere, and at that time, when we all were, as a commanding officer, I was there in Operagram, and later when we were reading about it, Pakistan undertook an extensive exercise in hiring civil transport, and they were mapping the various trawlers that were available with the farmers and how they can be effectively used for movement of guns, for movement of cargo, movement of troops. And that's an exercise by itself. I just want to leave the thought over there. But now we should have an out of the box thinking in terms of, can we think of UAVs as a medium of transportation? Can we think of heavy lift helicopters as a medium of transportation of cargo? Can we draw a cost benefit analysis of placing a few UAVs per theater, like for example in the Northern Command, Eastern Command, and quickly move cargo, and maybe it can do multiple trips over one night, and instead of moving a full convoy which is prone to a number of attacks, and we look for BS4 vehicles and things like that. So can we think of UAVs? Can we think of the heavy lift helicopters? Can we think of a combination of how we can combine the UAVs and this? And can we think of the multiple uses of UAVs? Because after all, the aircraft is available to you for any number of roles. And we talked about the electric vehicles. It was talked about by the DG. The director Sessiojn also talked, and Upadhyay was mentioning about just in case. So when we talk about a just in case and a just in time, if you want to compare both of them, then I think what is important is we have to find out what is available in our inventory and how to maximize that inventory for a just in case situation. And I think that will ensure that our logistics are not stretched, and thereby assuring what the armed forces require at a point in time. Director Sessiojn did speak about Northeast and Arunachal, and I think the point is, in terms of logistics, China sits far behind and we are sitting far ahead, and this is because of an underdeveloped logistics systems that we have. And as we build up this, I'm sure the things are going to improve. So we talked about the challenges and their possible solution. We talked about the insufficiency of railway infrastructure, and coupled with this issue, the lack of technical staff and training stations, staff at the training stations in the overall, trained workforce with the railways. In the air transportation, we talked about lack of proper landing strips in high altitude and border areas. We talked about the infrastructure challenges that need to be taken. And I want to talk about, a positive news at this point in time is the recently developed dedicated freight corridor by the Indian Railways, which provides a faster movement of freight across the country. On 14 June 21, very recently, Indian Army conducted a successful trial by moving a military train loaded with vehicles and equipment from New Rewari to New Fulera, validating the efficacy of the dedicated freight corridor. This is what is required, and this is how we need to move forward. The intricate and synchronized coordination by the Indian Army with the Dedicated Freight Corridor Corporation of India and the Indian Railways would significantly enhance the mobilization capability of the armed forces. These trials were part of the whole of the nation approach. I like this concept, whole of the nation approach, for optimizing national resources and achieve seamless synergy amongst various ministries and departments. Interactions by the Indian Army with all stakeholders, including the DFCCIL and Indian Railways, would now assist in leveraging the DFC and allied infrastructure into the mobilization matrix of the armed forces. We also talked about the development of infrastructure at certain locations to support mobilization and trials to validate move of defense-owned rolling stock on a roll-on, roll-off service as it is being formalized and modalities are evolved. So the question again, I want to say, we should not do what the industry can do. The armed forces should not do. It's time to outsource. It's time to go towards the 5 trillion economy. And 5 trillion economy can come about when we actually provide that fillip to the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the industry of the 50s. Industry has emerged. So must our restructuring to optimal utilization of the scarce resources of the nation. I want to compliment my team, which is led by Nayan Nag and Himanshu Mishra and Commander Ajay Panwar, who have actually and we have excellent 2 interns. I want to acknowledge their contribution to this, Karthik and Anima Mandwaria. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colonel Kuber, for that industry perspective coming from someone who has spent long years in uniform. So with that insight, and you transported us way back into millennia, back into Mahabharata, and as to how shared that the fact that we have been delivering precise logistics even way back 2,500 years, 100 years back, 5,000 that you mentioned. And so indeed, a host of issues have been tackled by you and your team, Ernst & Young, in the paper that we are going to be sharing with everybody. And each of the issues that you have highlighted, you have walked through a whole range of them. I will not go over each of them. I think you have made some very telling points and observations. So all our viewers will be very conscious of that, and participants in their deliberations through the day. So thank you so much, Colonel Kuber, and we'll particularly take note of something that you repeated very often, that the armed forces should not do what the industry can do, and the industry has indeed come of age. So we'll acknowledge that as we go along during the course of our deliberations. Thank you so much. I want to thank all the participants of the eminent speakers of the inaugural session. I think what has come out very clearly is that there are challenges, and to overcome these challenges, we have to stay invested not just in terms of commitment, but also in terms of money. Optimization when it comes to logistics should be done with due caution. And before I close, I would just want to request, in case Upadhyay. Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Hello,
sir.
am I
Yes, sir.
audible?
You're okay.
Yeah, sorry, there was an interruption. So before we close, I do see some questions on the screen, and the questions have been, the viewers who have raised these questions, I'll request you to raise those questions in those relevant sessions. As of now, I would just request General Upadhyay, in case you have any closing observations to make before we close the session.
Yeah, and no major observations. I'll go back to, I think, the DGST Jal Yadav has left and Mr. Agarwal have also left. The fact remains, which I mentioned as just in case and just in time, and General Yadav was mentioning peacetime logistics and wartime logistics. The last mile. The challenge is the balance. Today when we analyze our investment being made into logistics, and how to optimize our costs and establishment that we hold for wartime effort. And so primarily what it is that the back end of it can be now given to the civil logistics, which can take care of it. But definitely the wartime logistics, especially the last mile delivery, has to be retained by us. Nobody can replace it. And the challenge to visualize what is this last mile? Where does the last mile start? Has the last mile moved up or is it still far behind? Is what we'll need to answer. As far as intra-service integration goes, I will also tend to agree with General Yadav when he was saying that the service-specific structures need to be retained to the extent possible because of the diverse requirements. The requirements are too varied. I will again simple example. One said we should have common procurement of uniforms. There's nothing common in our uniform. Navy procures whites and Air Force procures blues and we procure the greens. Right? So you can't procure commonly. But so it is a big challenge. Easier said than done. And definitely integrated logistic planning. When in areas like aviation is one area which is very amenable to integration and commonality coming in, especially helicopters and stuff like that. And we have to work towards it. So there's no denying that. I'll leave it at that. And we have a big challenge in mindset change to come in to start with. Once that happens, I'm sure other things will follow. Now, as we go by, I'm sure things will move at a faster pace as opposed to the past. And we'll see very many improved things coming in. Thank you once more, General Srivastav, for this opportunity and at least an opportunity to listen to others. All the best to you.
Thank you so much for those closing thoughts. And here we will end the inaugural session. And I'll just request General Ravi Arora to tell all our participants as to when do we join in again for the next session. We move on straight
Yes,
away.
sir. Thank you, sir. I will just share with everybody the report which has been prepared by Ernst and Young. This is the paper, knowledge paper by Ernst and Young prepared on land mobility and logistics. It will be sent end of day today by email to all participants, speakers, and attendees. So please expect that. And now we move on to the. Yes, sir.
Our compliments to Karan Kuber and his team. Thank you. Thank you, team Ernst and Young.
Right. So we now move on to the next session. I will close the session, open the next one immediately. You can all migrate and join session 2, and we will start after 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir.